A four-star admiral just sat down across from Iranian officials in a nuclear negotiation. He wasn't backstage. He wasn't advising from the shadows. He was at the table in his full dress whites, representing the United States of America. And at that exact moment, everyone in that room understood something. America didn't come to make small talk. This is the hammer strategy. And it's about to change everything about how America negotiates with its enemies. Because at the exact same time this was happening in Oman, halfway around the world in Abu Dhabi, another military leader was sitting across from Ukrainian and Russian officials trying to end a war that's been grinding on for nearly 4 years. 2 negotiations, 2 military men at the table, one very deliberate message. The hammer strategy isn't about hitting anyone. It's about making damn sure they see the hammer. Today, I'm going to show you exactly why Trump is throwing out the diplomatic playbook and whether this bold gamble brings peace or blows up in our faces. So here's what just happened. Admiral Brad Cooper, the head of United States Central Command, one of the most powerful military positions in the entire American armed forces, walked into indirect talks with Iran on Friday. This is the guy who commands every American aircraft carrier in the Middle East, every fighter jet, every cruise missile, every special operations team, all of it. And he showed up in his full dress uniform. And across the table from him, Iranian officials who know that if these talks fail, the next conversation might not involve words at all. Think about it like this. You're negotiating to buy a car. Normally you bring your wife, maybe your accountant. But this time, you bring a professional MMA fighter. He doesn't say anything. He just stands behind you with his arms crossed. You haven't threatened anyone. But everyone in that room knows the negotiation just changed. That's what Trump did. He brought the MMA fighter to the car dealership. And the car dealership is Iran's nuclear program. Now, here's where the disagreement gets really interesting. Because the people saying Trump is wrong, they have a point. And the people saying he's right, they also have a point. And what happens next depends entirely on which group is reading the situation correctly. Elisa Ewers served in national security positions under both George W. Bush and Barack Obama, so she's seen how this works across party lines. Her verdict on Trump's approach? Blunt. She says placing active-duty military leaders like Cooper directly into diplomatic roles shows how the administration has, and these are her words, devalued skilled diplomats and the tools of diplomacy. She even quoted an old idiom, "Not every nail needs a hammer." In plain English, she's saying just because you have the world's most powerful military doesn't mean the threat of force should be your first move in every negotiation. But wait, there's a counter-argument here that actually makes a lot of sense. Elliot Cohen served as counselor of the State Department under George W. Bush, and he pushes back hard. He points out that American generals were directly involved in arms control talks with the Soviet Union during the Cold War. This isn't completely unprecedented. Presidents do this kind of thing, he says, when they trust someone and think they can deliver the message. There's a long tradition of it. So which is it? Dangerous overreach or bold, unconventional strategy? The hammer strategy says it doesn't matter what the critics think. What matters is whether the other side blinks. And right now, the other side is watching very carefully. The talks in Oman are aimed at one thing, cooling down the escalating tensions between Iran and the United States. And those tensions are real. The region is on edge. One wrong move, one miscalculation, and decades of fragile stability could collapse in an afternoon. Trump himself said the talks were very good, and that more are planned for early next week. But then he dropped this warning. If Iran does not make a deal over its nuclear program, the consequences are very steep. Now, when Donald Trump says consequences are very steep, and Admiral Brad Cooper is sitting right there in his dress whites, and the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group is positioned in the region. That's not just words. That's a message. And everyone in that room understands exactly what it means. We're talking about a carrier strike group with over 7,000 sailors, enough aircraft to darken the sky, and enough firepower to reshape the entire region in a single night, floating right off Iran's coastline, right now, as you're watching this. Trump has repeatedly threatened to use force to compel Iran to reach an agreement. He sent the Abraham Lincoln and other warships to the region during Tehran's bloody crackdown on nationwide protests. The military buildup isn't hypothetical. It's there, it's visible, and the Iranians can see it from their own shores. The hammer strategy in action. Cooper isn't there to threaten anyone directly. His presence is the threat. Analysts at Brookings called it what it is, intimidation. The question is whether that intimidation moves the needle. or just backs Iran into a corner where they feel they have no choice but to push forward faster? There's another perspective worth hearing. Michael Singh served as senior director for the Middle East at the White House National Security Council under Bush, and he sees Cooper's presence differently. He thinks it's less about intimidation and more about expertise. Here's his logic. Witkoff and Kushner are generalists. They're not Iran nuclear experts. But Admiral Cooper, during his nomination hearing just a few months ago, he spent significant time discussing exactly how America could respond to Iran's nuclear capabilities. He knows the targets. He knows the timelines. He understands what any proposed concession would actually mean on the ground. Singh put it this way: "These are very technical issues we're dealing with. They're not issues you can deal with instinctively." Admiral Cooper has access to that expertise in a way that Witkoff and Kushner either don't or might not choose to access. So maybe it's both. Cooper brings the knowledge and the implicit threat of force. As Elliot Cohen put it, that's part of the negotiation. When the guy who commands every American aircraft carrier in the Middle East is sitting across from you in full dress uniform, that's not just a negotiation. That's a warning with a seat at the table. But the hammer strategy isn't just playing out with Iran, because halfway around the world, something arguably even more consequential is happening, and the guy Trump put in charge of it has a secret weapon that most people aren't talking about. Army Secretary Dan Driscoll got a call back in November that changed everything. The Ukraine negotiations had hit a wall. Nothing was moving. Both sides dug in. Distrust running so deep that even basic communication had broken down. But Driscoll had a trip to Ukraine already on his calendar, and he used it to do something unconventional. He sat down directly with Zelensky. He met with Ukrainian generals still carrying the weight of the front lines on their shoulders. And he started building something the formal negotiations couldn't create on their own: trust. Since then, Driscoll has been part of several negotiation sessions, including the ones this week in Abu Dhabi. And here's what's fascinating. According to a person familiar with the negotiations, Driscoll's role has evolved into something specific. He's become a kind of liaison between the Ukrainians and Trump officials' running point on these talks. People like Witkoff and Kushner, who are juggling both the Iran and Ukraine situations simultaneously. That relationship, that trust, came from Driscoll's ability to keep the dialogue going even between formal negotiation sessions. But it also comes from something else. Driscoll isn't some desk jockey who's never seen the real world. He commanded tanks. He served as an armor officer. He deployed to Iraq. When he sits across from Ukrainian generals who are fighting for their country's survival, he actually understands what they're going through. These are men who've watched their soldiers die, who've held the line while the world debated whether to help, who've buried friends and then gone right back to the front. When Driscoll sits with them, he's not some Washington suit who's never heard a shot fired. They know he's been where they are. That changes the conversation completely, the hammer strategy with a human touch, and it's not just Driscoll. In Abu Dhabi this week, he was joined by General Alexis Grinkowicz, the commander in Europe of both U.S. and NATO forces. Together, they helped negotiate something that most people completely missed in the headlines, something that might matter more than anything else we've discussed: the reestablishment of high-level military-to-military dialogue between the United States and Russia. Stop and think about this for a second. 4 years. That's how long the American and Russian militaries went without talking directly. Not during the Cuban Missile Crisis, not during the tensest moments of the Cold War. Now, in the age of hypersonic missiles and nuclear modernization, the two largest nuclear powers on Earth went 4 years without their militaries having a direct line of communication. What does that even mean? It's like two neighbors in a blood feud who've not only stopped speaking, they've torn down their mailboxes, disconnected their phones, boarded up the windows, and both houses are full of explosives. That's what we just fixed this week. The military put out a statement. This channel will stay open as both sides work toward peace. Whether you like how we fixed it, whether you agree with Trump's approach, that channel being open again is significant. Period. But here's the part that should really get your attention, because the implications of all this go way beyond these two negotiations. So what's really happening here? What's the bigger picture that nobody else is explaining? Here's my analysis. What we're watching is a fundamental reimagining of how American foreign policy works, and it comes down to a basic philosophical question about power and leverage. The traditional model puts diplomats at the center, State Department professionals who spend decades learning languages, building relationships, understanding cultural nuances. Diplomacy is a slow, patient, often invisible craft. It works. It's worked for decades, but it takes an enormous amount of time, investment, and hard work to get to the point where you can claim success. And sometimes you run out of time. The Trump approach is different. It puts leverage at the center. And the ultimate form of leverage America has is its military. So why have a diplomat hint at consequences when you can have a four-star admiral sitting there representing those consequences in the flesh? Diplomats are surgeons, precise, patient, careful. Generals are sledgehammers. Both solve problems. But you better be damn sure you're using the right tool. Traditional diplomacy is like chess. You make moves, counter moves, study the board, think 10 steps ahead. Trump's approach is more like poker with a gun on the table. You can still play the cards, but everyone's aware the rules might change at any second, and that changes how everyone plays. The hammer strategy bets that the other side needs to see the sledgehammer before they'll take the surgeon seriously. Here's what keeps me up at night about this. If Trump is right, and this aggressive approach works, we could see breakthroughs on two of the most dangerous situations in the world right now. Real progress on Iran's nuclear program. A genuine path to ending the bloodshed in Ukraine. Military-to-military communication restored between nuclear superpowers for the first time in 4 years. That's not nothing. That's potentially historic. But if he's wrong, if this approach backs Iran into a corner where they feel they have no choice but to accelerate their nuclear program, if it makes Putin believe we're not serious about diplomacy, only intimidation, if it convinces our allies that American foreign policy is now purely transactional, we're looking at an escalation that could drag the entire world into something much worse, something none of us can take back. That's the gamble. That's what's actually at stake here, and we're all along for the ride whether we like it or not. The consequences of this approach are just beginning to unfold. Trump said more Iran talks are planned for early next week. The Ukraine negotiations continue. The military-to-military channel with Russia is now open for the first time since 2021. Every one of these fronts is moving simultaneously, and we're watching it happen in real time. And what should really keep the Iranians and the Russians up at night? Trump isn't bluffing about the military option. The generals at the table prove that. The carrier strike group floating off the coast proves that. The four-star admiral in his dress, whites, proves that. The only question now is whether showing the hammer gets a deal done or starts a fight nobody can finish. The hammer strategy. You can love it. You can hate it. But you can't deny it's different. When you send a four-star admiral to a nuclear negotiation in full dress uniform, you're not making a suggestion. You're making a statement. We're not here to talk forever. We have options. Whether that statement delivers peace or sets off something far worse, the whole world is about to find out. If you want to be here when it happens, subscribe and turn on notifications. This story is just getting started. I'll see you in the next one.